Yeah, looks like it. No, no. I'm not that brave. Yeah, I think I'm good. Thank you. I expected as much. brave Sunday crew. Well, that's the worst part for me, like the Sunday morning slot. That was like the offering. Sorry about that. No, no. All right. Good morning, everyone. You guys hear me in the back? Perfect. So this talk is called Bug Hunting in Router OS. But I probably should have named this talk too much about protocols. But none of you would have woken up this early. We're already a small crowd, so it's good I tricked you to get in here. So here we go. Now, before we get going, I want you all to know that the slides and the code that I referenced in this talk, it's already up on GitHub. I made this repository public just this morning. So if you get bored of me mapping JSON to binary, feel free to just hop on GitHub, pull that down, and jump ahead. Now this talk is broken down into 4 parts. In part 1, I'll start off by introducing myself and Router OS. In part 2, I'll spend some time explaining how you can root Router OS VMs. Because when you're bug hunting, having access to the file system, being able to run tools like GDB is pretty important. Part 3, we'll talk about the message protocol. And we'll be in that section for quite a while, but just know that it's really fundamental for part 4, where we're going to talk about 3 different bugs. So starting with the introduction. My name is Jake Baines. I often use the handle Albino Lobster, and that's why that guy's up there. I currently work at Tenable as a senior research engineer, and I'm the team lead of the Zero-Day Research Group. Bug hunting in Router OS is a really generic title, so you might be wondering what you're actually going to learn here. From my point of view, this talk is purely practical. It's kind of a dummy's guide to hacking Router OS. After this talk, you'll be able to root VMs. You know how to communicate over port 80 and 8291. You'll understand how the Nova binaries relate to the message protocol. And you'll have a boatload of bad C++ code to read and possibly even use. And most importantly, for my own ego, I'm going to share with you a brand new vulnerability that we can all play with. But before you learn all that, we start at the beginning. What is Router OS? Now, Router OS is the operating system used on a variety of MikroTik switches, routers, and access points. And although it's not really the operating system, these devices actually run Linux, Router OS is a whole bunch of binaries and kernel modules that run in that context. But either way, Router OS ships on a really wide variety of hardware. You can see some samples here. We have everything from edge routers to wireless access points. They can be used in the enterprise or at home. And perhaps most importantly, these devices are fairly well known for being cheap. Now, it's sort of important to know, MikroTik churns out Router OS releases like it's nobody's business. In fact, I probably updated this slide about 10 times and just gave up last week. But suffice to say, they keep 4 major branches going. Legacy, a long-term, a stable, and a beta. Now, to get an idea of what's actually out there in the wild, I hopped on Shodan, and I just looked at FTP banners, which we all know Shodan isn't perfect, and perhaps looking at FTP banners is a little unfair because the type of administrator that keeps their FTP open to the world on the router probably isn't patching. But I think this gives us a basic idea of what's out there. You know, a whole lot of stable, nearly equal amounts of long-term and legacy. Bizarrely, there's measurable amounts of their beta releases, which is actually release candidate code, which I wouldn't run on my router. And finally, there was measurable amounts of 4.x. The last 4.x release was 7 years ago, so it's not great. So in the last year and a half, there's been a lot of excitement about RouterOS in the news, which is mostly bad news for MikroTik. So it's pretty interesting to us. There are 2 different threat actors currently in the wild, Slingshot APT and VPN Filter. There are a couple of big vulnerabilities that have come out. Cheme-Red was an unauthenticated remote code execution vulnerability alluded to in Vault 7, and a researcher has since written a POC for it. And then there's CV 2018-14847, and that's actively being exploited for nefarious activities as I speak. Kind of interesting, MikroTik was recently added to Zerodium, so if you're looking for a payout, you might want to listen. Now, I'm not the first to present MikroTik research, and I'm trying to avoid covering this old research. It's good to show what's already out there. Rooting the MikroTik routers was previously presented at SHA 2017, and while I'd love to pronounce that gentleman's name, I would butcher it and not only embarrass myself, but maybe him. But either way, both his talk and his GitHub repository were super useful to me. And while tools written up by Lorenzo, those are all POCs for vulnerabilities, they weren't necessarily useful for my purposes. He documented some good insights into RouterOS itself. And finally, just last week, Talos released a Winbox Wireshark detector. Kind of stealing some of my research, but it's cool, Talos. All right. So you know a little about me, you know a little bit about RouterOS. So let's move on to rooting the devices. Now this topic's really important, as I said, because when you're actually bug hunting, the ability to collect core dumps, attach GDB, or simply list which binaries are on which core is pretty fundamental. So here we go. To start, we need something to test on. Unfortunately, RouterOS can be virtualized. You can go to MikroTik's website and download any version from the last 8 years, which is all the way back to 4.10. In this slide, you can see I've created a VM with a 6.40.9 ISO. Now, unfortunately, the shells offered on the console, Telnet, and SSH are totally useless to us as bug hunters. Those shells they only process RouterOS commands. They don't provide any access to Linux or BusyBox shell or the underlying file system. It's almost like they don't want us to have a real shell. But of course, developers want real shells too. So fortunately, the MikroTik developers have our back and they inserted a backdoor. But before we get all excited, this backdoor requires a specific file be present on the file system. And in normal cases, users don't have access to this part of the file system, so it's probably all right. Now, for whatever reason, MikroTik has changed this behavior over time. There are 3 major versions of the backdoor, so I'm going to run you through those. In 6.40.9, which is a long-term release, you'll find the pictured code blocks in nova/bin/login. Now, I couldn't fit the full logic in the slides, but the gist is this. Is the login user's name devel? If so, does the file devel-login exist in nova/etc? If so, is the logging in user using the admin password? If so, drop down into a BusyBox shell. Now the logic in 6.41.4, which is a stable release, is similar, except now some of the logic lives in libUmessage. You can see in the slides that after the login binary determines the user's devel, it makes a call to a library function called hasOptionPackage, which in turn calls a function called hasPackage, with a string option as a parameter. And hasPackage just checks the parameter exists in the package directory, so the backdoor file for this version is package/option. Now from 6.42 upwards, the backdoor logic is the same as 6.41.4, except hasPackage has extra checks. And specifically, it verifies that package/option has a file system type of squashfs, or that a symlink is pointing to the bundle directory. While that doesn't sound problematic, you'll see in a few slides that it is. So now that we know what the backdoor file is, how do we actually create it? Because, like I said, normal users don't have access to the underlying file system. But that's where virtualization really helps us. We can just boot the VM into a live CD, mount the file system, and create files as needed. Now, I don't fully understand RouterOS's file system overlay, and I've not seen other researchers describe booting the VM quite like I do, but this is how I do it. I drop a symlink to the root directory in the mounted file system rw/disk directory, and this is the directory that FTP has access to. And after rebooting the device, I can then FTP in, traverse the symlink, and create a backdoor file using make-dir. It's also a really good opportunity to drop BusyBox and GDB server on the system. It's really important to drop a new BusyBox because the BusyBox on these systems is notorious for lacking features, like missing ls commands and such. Now, in this slide, you can actually see me logged in as the Devel user. Again, I dropped right to the BusyBox shell. But before we get too excited, we have to remember that in 6.42 and up, the changes were made to check file system type. In those newer versions, the file type has to be squashfs. But you can see in the slide, my backdoor method creates a file with a file system type of tempfs. So these newer versions, we need to find another way to get root. So fortunately, RouterOS has an init script that will execute anything in the rw/defconf file. And as written, I think they want to provide bin/gosh with parameters. And for those that are excited that gosh might be the Go shell, it is unfortunately not. It's a symlink to a login binary. But either way, there's nothing stopping us from adding commands after bin/gosh has been executed. So in this slide, you can see I've booted into the live CD again. I've echoed commands to rw/defconf. The commands will start telnet on port 1270 using a BusyBox that I put in rw/disk. So sadly, that we've moved on from the backdoor file for the new version, but the result is the same. After rebooting, all you need to do is connect, and this is a pictured 6.43. Okay, we can root all versions of the RouterOS VM, and that's pretty useful. But as bug hunters, what we really want to be doing is hunting bugs. So let's move on to that fun stuff. And let's start with an Nmap scan. We immediately find a good amount of attack surface. You see that FTP is open. There are 6 different management ports: SSH, Telnet, HTTP. Winbox is on 8291. There are 2 MikroTik API ports, 8728 and 8729. And the bandwidth server is open on 2000. Now, I'm a sucker for both familiarity and low-hanging bugs. So like many, I go straight to the HTTP interface. Except this traffic is a little weird. It's just posting over and over again to JS proxy. The data doesn't really look normal, possibly encrypted. And the content type says message, which I'm pretty sure is not like a conventional thing. So it leaves me asking, what's going on here? Now we know the browser is sending post requests, so there must be some logic on the client side that controls this behavior. It's just a matter of tracking down where the browser got that logic. Now, looking at the early stages of the connection, we see webfig/master.js, which I've highlighted here. And that seems like an interesting candidate. And it turns out it is an interesting candidate. It's the code that's actually making the post request to JS proxy. And it's about 17,000 lines of JavaScript. In this slide, you can see some of the HTTP post requests to JS proxy. I've highlighted them, as well as some authentication logic. Now, as it turns out, they've implemented MS-CHAP v2 key derivation and RPC4 encryption in JavaScript, which seems like a really odd choice to me. Using TLS seems much easier, but at least these algorithms are very familiar. RFC 3079 is nearly 18 years old now. So what are our steps forward from here? We want to explore this interface, but the communication is hidden behind custom encryption. The obvious answer to me, at least, is that we need to write a tool to decrypt this traffic. But before we can decrypt anything, we need to know how the key negotiation works. We can see here that it starts with the client sending an empty HTTP post request. And doing some unpictured RE, we know that the server's response should contain 4 bytes of session ID, 4 bytes of sequence number, and 16 bytes of challenge text, which adds up to 24 bytes. But you can also see in this slide that the content length in the HTTP response is 37 bytes. So for a little while there, I was wondering, again, what's going on? Well, it turns out that everything is encoded into UTF-8 code points, so the size of the payload is always going to be variable. This is just a quick example of decoding the code points. You see everything sanely goes down to exactly what I said, 4416. Now, after the client receives the server's challenge, it computes the challenge response, as well as the send and receive RC4 keys. The client then sends a big blob back to the server containing the following information: a username, the server challenge, the client challenge, and an encrypted challenge response, which is everything he needs to do an offline brute force of the password. I coded up a little project that does this for us. It just takes in a PCAP and a password list, and it'll spit out the username and password. You can see in this example, I was using the password Zen. At first, this seems like a toy, but you need to realize that in the real world, this traffic is flowing over the internet. So it's important that just last month, MikroTik moved away from this implementation in their stable range. They moved to 6.43, which now uses a curve-based key exchange. Long term is still expected, and as I showed earlier, patching is not great on these systems. Now, this is not a toy. This is actually pretty useful for us. This tool decrypts the contents of a JS proxy session in a PCAP, and it writes the decrypted messages to standard out. This is an example from 6.32.3, and we find underneath the RC4 encryption JSON-based message system. But the protocol here isn't obviously anything, at least it wasn't to me, so I had to dig into it. We see each JSON key value pair is broken down into 3 parts. In the first part, the first character defines the type, of which there are 14 different types, and I've listed them all here. The second part is a hex integer, and it represents the name. And finally, part 3 is the value. Now, combined, these 3 things describe a variable. In the example in the slide, you can see that the first variable starts with a capital U, which means a 32-bit array. It has a name of FF0001 and an array value of 13.7. Furthermore, the protocol has some built-in or known variable types. For example, uppercase U FF0001 from the previous example stands for system2, and lowercase u FF0007 stands for command. I've listed some of the other built-ins in this slide. So hopefully we understand the basics of the format, but obviously we don't understand what any of that means. Stuff like system2, like what is that? If we look at the decrypted traffic, there are all sorts of different system2 array values. Some have 1 entry, and some have 2 entries, and there are all sorts of different numbers. Now there's one line in the JavaScript that gives us a hint. In the example in this slide, the system2 is set to this.id_fileman and this.id_transfer. And it turns out that fileman is the name of a binary sitting in Router OS's file system within Nova/bin. Now, in my own bug hunting journey, a good deal of time passed before I stumbled upon this. But eventually, I found the system.x3 file used by the Nova/bin/loader binary. This caught my attention finally, because it lists all the other Nova/bin binaries in it, and there's some type of pattern. So I just started pulling it apart. In this slide, I pulled out a single entry from the system.x3 file. And this entry is for Nova/bin/log. Each entry is associated with an ASCII number. For example, you can see that Nova/bin/log appears to be associated with the number 3. I've highlighted that in yellow. So is it possible that 3 is log system2 number? So pictured here is some decrypted traffic where the system.2 starts with a 3. The contents of this traffic is the RouterOS log file. You can clearly see a number of user admin logged in entries. So I would say it appears that the system.x3 file does map the system2 mapping. Fortunately, no one needs to parse this x3 by hand because I wrote a tool to do it. X3 parse will take in a system.x3 file and spit out all the system mappings. And from what I've observed, these mappings don't really change across versions. It's more likely that new mappings are added as MikroTik rolls out new features. Now, some of you observant people might be thinking, what about the 4? If you didn't notice, in the previous log example, the system2 array had 2 numbers in it, a 3, which we've learned is associated with a binary, specifically the log binary, and a 4, which I totally ignored. On the left side of the slide, you'll see a screenshot from Nova/bin/log in IDA. You should notice that the repeated calls to add handler associated with a number and a handler pointer. You're now looking at the second number in the system2 array. Now, a handler is an object that handles different commands sent to it. On the right, you can see handler number 4 in the Nova/bin/log binary. Messages with a system2 of 3, 4 are handled by this object. Now, an obvious question at this point is how many system2 endpoints in RouterOS are there? Do we have to manually map them? The answer is no, we don't. I wrote a binary Ninja script that will do it for us. The script takes in a directory of binaries, ideally Nova/bin, and spits out the handler numbers associated to each binary. The screenshot in this slide shows the handler numbers for the first few processed binaries. You can see some of the binaries just have 1 handler, and others it doesn't. And there appears to be no real rhyme or reason to how the handlers are numbered. So let's go back to the original example. We now know exactly what the system2 array means. For this message, this is for the 7th handler and the binary that is mapped to 13, which happens to be Nova/bin/user. But now what does the number and the command variable mean? Fortunately, thanks to very useful debugging functions in libumessage, finding the command mappings was probably the easiest thing I did. I've listed the known ones here. We can see that the command provided in the example is OBYFE-OOOD, or the get command. Now I want to draw your attention to the red text in the right-hand corner. It's actually really important to understand what an unknown command is. An unknown command is any value not listed in this slide. Handlers that use unknown commands have to implement their own functionality for processing those commands. Now you're probably thinking, this is all sort of making sense, so we'll probably start talking about bugs soon. But you're wrong, because MikroTik switched the HTTP interface from the JSON message format over to a binary format. So why present the JSON format at all? Well, I really like the JSON format. Once you understand it, it's simple to read. Also, MikroTik didn't remove the functionality. You can still talk JSON just fine to the HTTP server, but by default, it wants to talk binary to you. But it's not all bad. The underlying message protocol is the same. It's just formatted a little bit differently. In this slide, you see I've mapped the type, name, and value in both formats. Now, unlike the JSON version, which relies on delimiters, the binary version needs length fields. So every message starts off with a 1 byte packet length, a security mode flag, 2 bytes of total message length, and then the magic M2. All that is finally followed by the actual message data. Note that the data in this slide is as it appears on the wire, as in I copied and pasted it straight from Wireshark. So we'll be flipping some of the fields when we talk about how they're actually constructed. So similar to the JSON version, types and names are merged into one field. In the binary format, they're merged into a 4-byte value, where the highest 8 bits are the type and the lowest 24 bits are the variable name. Just like the JSON format, there are 14 different types of variables, and in fact, they're the exact same variable types found in the JSON format. In this slide, you'll see I've stacked the different versions so they're easier to compare. Boolean values are sort of unique in how they're encoded, and that the type field doubles as the value. A type of O1 is true, and a type of OO is false. The variables that describe integers contain 4 bytes of integer data unless a short bit is set. In that case, only 1 byte of data will follow the variable name. The short bit is the lowest bit in the type field. You can see in the slide an integer variable normally has a type of 8, but when the short bit is set, it has a type of 9. Now, similar to the previous example, the short bit controls the size of the length field in string variables. Normally, a string's length is 2 bytes, but with the short bit set, the field is just 1 byte. And the message type is literally messages embedded in the current message, which means that you're going to see the preamble again. Here you can see the M2 right there in the middle. It's 4032. And again, you can see the length field is controlled by a short bit. Kind of a funny side note that I'm the only one that's ever laughed at it, I think. CVE 2018-1158 describes how Microtik's JSON parser makes unbounded recursive calls to handle embedded messages. If a message recurses deep enough, an attacker could trigger a Stack Overflow, and the system would reboot. I was the one that actually reported that vulnerability. As you can see, I've written a fair amount of code for this project. So the funny part is that this bug still exists in my code. Now, the length field in an array variable actually describes the number of entries in the array. This slide's example, the length is set to 2, and the length is followed by 2 32-bit ints. That's because the variable's type is a 32-bit array, so 2 entries gives us 2 32-bit arrays. Now, I'm impressed you guys have hung on this long. I'm done describing the protocol fields. I won't be mapping JSON to binary anymore. We're getting close to the good stuff. Microtik offers a fixed client for router configuration called Winbox, and it communicates on 8291. And as it turns out, it uses the binary message protocol that I just described. So I wasn't totally wasting your time. You now know how to talk to both HTTP and the Winbox port. And of course, I had to write a parser for Winbox as well. So similar to the HTTP parser, this tool takes in a PCAP and spits out the messages in JSON format. Now, Talos just released a Wireshark detector with similar functionality just a week ago. So, thanks, guys. Now, knowing the message protocol is truly fundamental to bug hunting in RouterOS. Now that you know how to form the system, now you know what system2 means, how handlers work, and how to format messages, you can reach any of these binaries in Nova/bin, which, as you can see, is a pretty large attack surface. And I know what you're thinking. This guy titled his talk Bug Hunting in RouterOS, doesn't present a single damn bug in the first 30 minutes. Well, you finally made it. I'm not done talking about protocol junk, not by a long shot, but we're ready to talk about 3 different bugs. You can see on the left a Stack Overflow in the license upgrade binary. This vulnerability can be triggered remotely through Winbox or HTTP, but it requires authentication. I reported this vulnerability in late May, and Microtik released a patch in August. Now, one of the ways I like to start bug hunting ELF binaries, and I know a lot of other people do this, is I just look at the imports and find any known bad functions, stuff like systems, the exec functions, printf, stir copies, whatever. When I was looking at the license upgrade binary, I found the sprintf being used to perform an HTTP GET request. Now, obviously, at this point in the investigation, I have no clue if I can control any of these parameters, but it looks pretty interesting. The username and password parameters really stick out to me. So let's figure out where those values come from and if we can control them. LibViewMessage has a whole bunch of helper functions for pulling variables out of messages. On this slide, we can see two has functions, looking for two string IDs, string ID 1 and string ID 2. We can also see that if the has functions fail, the strings no username and no password get pushed onto the stack. So clearly, string 1 is the username and string 2 is the password. When I see these types of message functions, I generally assume that I can hit this code over the network and that I have control of the contents. So if that's the case, we just need to figure out how we can actually reach this code. The first step to figuring out how to reach the sprintf is to figure out the system2 array. Using the X3 parse tool we discussed earlier, we know that the license upgrade binary's system number is 55. So the question is, what's the handler number? Following the XREF in IDA upwards, we eventually arrive to an unknown command function and the handler pictured in this slide. Now this handler is part of the main looper construction, and it isn't added using addHandler. So there's no special handler ID for this object. So to send a message to this handler, we simply use an array with one entry of 55. So we know the system2 array, but now we need to know the commands to send in order to reach the sprintf. This handler's implementation of the unknown command function is basically a switch statement on the command value. In the IDA screenshot in this slide, you can see two cases, 1 and 4, that lead down to the function that calls sprintf. So we should be fine using either commands 1 or 4 in the message protocol's command variable. The very last part to reach this code is we just need to collect the remaining parameters we might need to correctly traverse the code path. In the previous slide, there was a bool variable with an ID of 7. Pictured in this slide are two int32s being extracted from the message ID 3 and ID 6. But I don't really see any of these being used until after the sprintf is hit, so we probably don't need anything specific in there for our purposes. At the bottom of this slide, you'll see a full message we want to send in JSON. But before we test that message, can we hit the sprintf without authentication? Sure, I told you earlier that CVE 2018-1156 requires authentication, but I didn't offer any evidence either. So here's some evidence. I've learned that every unknown command is assigned a policy. In this slide screenshot, you can see commands 1 through 6 being assigned a policy of 200 hex. What exactly does that mean? I'm not entirely sure. But what I do know is that commands that don't require auth, they have a policy of 0. And as such, none of the license upgrade unknown commands are unauthenticated. So now we have everything we need to write a proof of concept. And I'd like to highlight a few things in the screenshot on the right. As part of this project, I wrote a message implementation to make creating, sending, and receiving messages easy. You can see in the POC that message construction is just a series of function calls, and all the formatting is handled for you. Also note how simple it is to serialize a message to JSON. This POC also relies on a JS proxy session class that handles all the authentication and session logic. You can also see that I've shoved 512 bytes of the letter A in the username field and the password field. So this POC will trigger the Stack Overflow. Now it's kind of tedious to look up every single handler and discover the command policy by hand. So I wrote a tool that does this automatically. It takes in the X3 parser output and the find handlers output, and it sends get policy requests to every single handler in the system. When the script is finished running, we've mapped out the entire attack surface of the nova/bin directory for the message protocol. We also have a really clear picture of how many commands can be invoked without authentication. And I believe that number is around 17 different commands. So let's talk about a bug being actively exploited in the wild. CVE 2018-14847 is being used to obtain the admin credentials to Router OS systems. Attackers have used those credentials to insert CoinHive JavaScript into 404 pages, proxy network traffic, and who knows what else. But I couldn't find any good write-ups on the bug itself. The CVE entry description simply says this: Winbox for MikroTik Router OS through 6.42 allows remote attackers to bypass authentication and read arbitrary files by modifying a request to change one byte related to a session ID. Now, if that doesn't make any sense to any of you, well, it doesn't make any sense to me. But luckily, there are a few implementations on exploit TVs. I think they're largely copy and paste of each other, but they all use the same hex blob. But it's really unclear what that hex blob means. So let's check that out. Using our newly acquired knowledge of the Winbox protocol, we can simply convert the first blob to a much easier to read JSON format. We can see the system2 array is the binary number 2 and handler number 2, and furthermore, the command being used is 7. And we do see that there is directory traversal to the user.dat file, which does contain the system's usernames and passwords. So let's keep looking. Using the X3 parser, we can quickly determine that binary number 2 is actually nova/bin/mproxy. Furthermore, we can quickly find handler number 2 by following an add handler call in mproxy and locating the unknown function implementation that command 7 drops down into. So what does command 7 actually do? All it does is open an existing file in home/web/webfig for reading. Now, mproxy replies to the client with a session ID and size of the open file. Unpictured here is the logic that checks for directory traversal. It's actually really large, it's convoluted, it doesn't fit into a slide, and since we're actually talking about the CVE, it obviously doesn't work. So the first payload makes sense. It opens the user.dat file for reading. So what does the second payload do? Again, we see the system2 array is mproxy handler number 2. The command is now 4. The request ID has been incremented, and the session ID now appears. There's also a new u2 variable. So what does this command 4 do? Unsurprisingly, it reads from the file opened in command 7. It reads the amount requested in the u2 variable. In this case, the POC hard-coded u2 to 32,768, and mproxy reads the file data and sends it back to the requester. And that is all there is to CVE 2018-14847. And it's actually really simple. But I didn't really like the hex blob implementation, so I rewrote a POC using my message implementation and a Winbox session class. To me, this is just easier to understand. And one thing you'll notice is that we never talked about authentication, yet the CVE's description clearly says bypass authentication. Using the policy discovery tool we talked about earlier, it's clear that commands 4 and 7 don't require authentication at all. Actually, the CVE's description is pretty confused all around. So last night I actually sent an updated description off to MITRE. And by the way, since we're already here, why don't we just check out the other unknown commands for handler 2. After poking around a bit, I found that commands 1 through 7 do the following. 1 opens a file, 2 writes to the opens a file for writing, 2 writes to that file. 3 opens a file for reading, and 4 reads the open file. 5 cancels the transfer and deletes the file. 6 creates a directory in /package, and as we know, 7 opens a file for reading. Now, is any of that useful or interesting to us? Most of those new commands require authentication, so none of us really care because we're big-time hackers and we only care about unauth RCE. But just hold on. Just remember that CVE 2018-14847 allows us to read the user.dat file and steal credentials. So we can hit pretty much any code path without knowing the creds beforehand. So that leaves me wondering, does the directory traversal exist for any other commands? In the IDA screenshot to the right, you see that the directory traversal function, which I creatively named check directory traversal, is shared by commands 1, 3, and 7. Both commands 3 and 7 open files for reading, so that's pretty exciting. But command 1 opens files for writing. So obviously writing is new functionality for us. What do we want to write? Do we overwrite user.dat? Maybe we write in a init script, or maybe there's a cron on the system we can take advantage of. Or we could just write the developer backdoor file, which I think works quite nicely. I've written up a proof of concept that does this. First steals the credentials and then creates backdoor files. That gives a remote unauthenticated attacker a root terminal on the device, which is pretty sweet for a device that doesn't want to give us any type of shell at all. Note that thankfully, since CVE 2018-14847 was patched in April, this too is patched. But patching is slow, and as of September 30th, again based on FTP banners, nearly 70% of the internet-facing microtik routers remain vulnerable to this remote routing technique. And that's a couple 100,000 routers. Now here's a little screenshot of me attempting to log in as Devel to a MIPS-based router board device that I've had in my home forever. After failing to log in, I then run the exploit and try to log in again, and I get my shell. That's all I have for you today. Okay. Does anyone actually have any questions? No? Okay.
How is it working with MikroTik?
So the last time I spoke to MikroTik was during the August patches. And they're fine. They're not super communicative, but that's most companies. I think there was a small language barrier, but it was generally okay.
How pissed were they when they figured out that you knew about their developer backdoor?
I'm not actually the first that figured that out. I've extended that. It doesn't seem to be that they're hiding it at all. It's fairly obvious if you're looking for it. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. I'm going to start singing. That's not a big idea. Anybody else want to talk about something for a couple seconds? Pam, do you want to talk about something? You always got something to say. Who doesn't have something to say then? Hey, do you want your laptop or can I keep this?
No, I don't really care.
Okay. Oh, okay, okay. Do you want your coffee? Okay, no problem. We're trying to figure out if the mic is, we're going to have to fix your audio in post, is essentially what happened. No, we can make you sound louder, but not smarter. Smarter is something, no. We can edit, we can edit the videos to make you say whatever we want. I don't see anything else. Oh, hey, this is a little magic box. Yep. Como? What? Oh, you're doing, okay. All right. the stream on and start listening to it. I don't know. Do you hear a difference? You're at the mixer board. So you tell me. Also, the buffering might take a while, so. I know. Ooh, I'm glad the microphone's over here and not over there. Okay, so this is fine? Then screw it. We're not doing anything. Talk into the microphone. What a concept. Okay. Some people aren't used to doing, like, this. Also, ooh, actually, how does it, got your ears on? So this is standing up normally speaking. This is up close speaking. What's the difference on the stream? Okay. Then, yeah. Cool. Let's just. sensitive this is. I mean, you're already coming over the stream loud and clear with this.
Is that the secret squirrel? Oh yeah. Let me log in. Well, we encourage heckling, so. I don't like that. If you're gonna. Nice. Kind of fun. We're doing great if we had a pirate hat or something when we did that, though. Yeah, that's cool. Get the presentation clicker. Cool. Got him right in the eyeball. I know. Maybe 15 minutes left. Yeah. He'll fall off the stage. Oh, the other stage left it. Oh, that's cute. Yeah, I'm gonna be right here. I'll be right here though. What are you saying about me? I'm trying to run more, okay? He knows me. Excellent. Do you have like a Milli Vanilli song you could cue up for us? And... Ah.
Go, ninja, go.
On in Los Angeles. Like Paul Stanley stage. Can we change our talk to like Paul Stanley, like stage banter for the next 50 minutes? Okay, cool. All right, nice.
1 minute.
PG-13? Is that cool? Well, I'm not doing that, so I think we'll be okay. All right, I guess we'll go ahead and get started.
Yeah, I guess we're going to go ahead and get started, guys.
We're going to go ahead and get started.
We're going to go ahead and get started, guys.
Yeah, as you can tell, we're extremely mature and highly professional, so yeah, I apologize in advance. My name is Brent White.
And I am Tim Roberts.
Yeah. And we're going to talk to you today about things that we do to bypass physical security controls and such.
We both work for NTT Security, Threat Services Group, so we do anything from technical to physical to social engineering and security awareness training, stuff like that. Our WeHackPeople.com, that's just a blog. That's where Brent and I keep a lot of our talks, some of our slides, and some of the references that we use throughout our presentation.
So probably goes without saying, not all hackers are bad. I know there's a pretty common misconception about hackers that when you hear that word, you think it's someone that's going to come like mug you in the parking lot and steal your baby. That's not us. There might be some out there like that, but not all of us are bad. One thing I do want to point out too, I know we're talking about unauthorized access, but just want to clarify the point when I use the term unauthorized, that is us taking on the role of an unauthorized user or some sort of person that's trying to do something malicious, but we always obviously have the proper approval before we do that, so we are not condoning anything illegal here.
So I kind of mentioned this before, this goes anywhere from pretexting to gathering OSINT to doing phishing and then leading into a physical compromise with, after you've kind of tested everything else. A lot of times our clients, they will have already done like their network application assessments and they want to see their other attack vectors, what are the threats, or they want to do a full red team assessment. So we have it broken up into specialists, into different areas of their expertise or subject matter experts. One of the main things that we do though is, Brent and I at least, do physical control bypass, so that's kind of what most of this is going to be talking about. So getting into the facility and then getting access to your network or a data jack or just some physical copies of some information or sensitive data.
Yeah, so we've given presentations before on social engineering and we've talked about war stories, things that we've done to actually compromise facilities. But the thing that's different about this talk is we're actually showing you basically every tool that we use, how we use it, and then we're also going to show how to mitigate against those certain attacks. We're not giving away all of our secrets, but a pretty good amount of things. Again, these are all items that you can buy publicly without having any sort of locksmith license or anything like that. And so that's kind of what we're going to go over today. So just some of I'm sure you guys have seen these. You can get some of these for really cheap. You can spend a lot of money on some high quality ones. But if you're wanting to go through and record what you're doing, make sure you check with the local laws and stuff. Some places that's illegal. Make sure that you check with that stuff first. But it's a good way just to easily document what you're doing as you're going through a facility. So that you're not always having to stop and lift your phone up and take pictures, things like that.
And some of the clients too, I mean, they agree if you work there, if you're inside of the building, then you're agreeing to be recorded because I mean, monitored, surveyed, and stuff like that. But you also want to double check with the client. A lot of clients like to see these things happen, so they want to see, well, how did you do that exactly? And sometimes pictures and documented evidence on a hard copy or something like that isn't as impactful as showing them a video of you doing it.
And obviously, there are going to be different rules that apply if you're doing an assessment in a sensitive area, maybe a secret, top secret area, things like that. You're going to have a lot different rules there. So make sure those are things that you understand with the client before you go, recording a bunch of video. Things can get pretty ugly that way.
So this is just something we wanted to have fun with because we got a drone and we were like, hey, let's do something with this drone and try to weaponize it. So we had like a Wemu, we had a few different things we were trying to use on it. And we just ended up strapping a Pineapple Nano on it. And it worked pretty well. So this is handy just for landing on top of the building and then having the access point on there for evil AP or whatever, or getting nearby. Ways to mitigate against this, because drone attacks are kind of becoming a bigger threat, is using like foliage, having trees and bushes and stuff like that, tall trees, heavy foliage, so they can't get close to look at badges or try to attack. Using tinted windows, having a busy roof, things like that are things to consider. I wouldn't worry about a drone coming and trying to shoot up the place or something, but it's not Terminator yet. But there are several wireless attacks that can be used on a drone, and this is the most simplistic remedial hacker script kiddie way of doing that.
Pretty cheap.
So.
And it took us a lot of time and a lot of research to figure out the perfect weight balance, so after about 5 minutes in industrial Velcro, we were good to go.
Yeah.
So.
It was very technical.
So, when you're doing these physical assessments, sometimes you need to make sure that if you're doing your surveillance, and they do have a lot of security cameras. I know a lot of federal places specifically are pretty heavily monitored. So one that I was doing in DC, I didn't want to just walk around looking normal, so I went to a gift shop and did like the Forrest Gump running across the United States look there. So that kind of helped. And then a quick war story too, was doing a physical against a hospital, and it was actually my first physical against a hospital. Wasn't really sure what to expect, and so after I'd been there for a while, realized like the sanitation crew wore like maroon scrubs, and nurses, they wore their own, and so I was like, well, that would be cool if I had those things. Where could I get it? And so I come around the corner, and they have a gift shop with every type of scrub for sale that was used in that facility. And so that was a pretty easy one.
Yeah, another interesting thing is the black scrubs back there. Phlebotomists use black scrubs, and they go to several different hospitals. So they're constantly, it's usually different people. So they're coming in and out, and that's pretty easy to walk around the hospital. It's unfortunate, but it is.
Does anybody in here do physicals against facilities like hospitals, things like that? So, so one of the things you can do if you're walking around, if you don't have scrubs and you're just seeing what you can do, you can actually print off the patient satisfaction surveys, because that's a very important thing in that field. So it sounds like a pitch, but on wehackpeople.com, the ones that I've used before, I'll save you the time. You can just go there and like download those and print them off and walk around with the clipboard. And if anyone says anything like, "Why are you in here?" just say, "Well, I'm just doing these patient satisfaction surveys." I'm like, "Well, you're not supposed to be in here." I'm like, "Sorry, I'm just a volunteer, I'm learning how to do this," and they usually will just let you go. So I live in Nashville, and so this next picture makes more sense. Wait for it. So a friend of mine was like, "You don't have, all hat, no cattle," and I was like, "It's okay, I play guitar." So I have my Wi-Fi Pineapple in there,
You got to get a big gallon hat for that.
Yeah.
So lockpick sets. I mean, there's several lockpick stuff. You guys been to Lockpick Villages or any hacker conference? I mean, most of you guys probably played with lockpicks at some point in your life. These are two of the sets that we use. I like using the Creeper set by Sparrows. There's a few tools that I like that I kind of interchange with it. But it's an easy in your pocket. It's flat back. It's solid. Got a great case, and so it's easy to get to and just kind of open up. The one on the right there, Brent usually uses that.
Yeah. So we both kind of have like custom sets that we've used, like the picks that we find that are best for us. And something I want to point out too, if you're not very good at lock picking, don't try to figure out how to do it while you're on client site trying to get into their building.
I got this new city rake. I really want to.
Yeah, let me try this rake. So, just multi-tools. These are really good too if you're trying to get into a door and they actually have secured it properly and there's not really a gap underneath to use like under the door tool or something. If there's a plate that's exposed, just take the thing off, and then, do what you need to do.
And if you got a Geist that, justifies why you'd be doing that during business hours, that is helpful.
Maintenance is good.
Being a maintenance or contractor of sorts, a good way to do that too is obviously surveillance, but the visitor log at the front of most desks, either with a security guard or administration staff, is it has a list of vendors, of authorized vendors on there. So and it's facing you so you can sign in, right? But if you're there asking a question and you get somebody to go in and ask a question and take a quick snapshot of that visitor log, it's helpful for developing GISes when you do these on-site social engineering or physical assessments.
So some of the research that we've done is where we do these assessments, we don't always want to walk in with a big backpack on our shoulders. Sometimes that can be suspicious. So we try to figure out, okay, what's the least amount of tools that we can use? What's with the smallest profile where we can put them in a suit, or like this GPD Pocket, this mini computer. At this time I had Ubuntu, but I now have Kali Linux installed on it. That's small enough to fit in the small of my back, so I don't have to have a large laptop. And you'll see some tools I'm sure you're probably familiar with, some Hack5 tools. The Milky Way, that's actual candy bar. So sometimes when you get into a place, let's say your nerves are, you've got your adrenaline going, you have some nerves. Tim and I, one of the things we like to do is like to find a place we can go hide for a little bit. It's usually the bathroom.
Usually the bathroom,
Yeah.
in a stall.
So if you have
Not
nerves,
together.
if you just take a few bites of some food, it helps to suppress that fight or flight response so that you can kind of, refocus.
The cigarettes do that too sometimes.
Yeah. So I don't smoke, but something we like to do too, which it seems to work, pretty much every time, is if there's a smoking area outside of a facility, and you can just walk up, smoke, talk with someone, kind of build that rapport, that trust, and they'll eventually follow them in the building when you're finished smoking.
Yeah, this may be getting ahead of ourselves because we got a picture of it, but recently we did an assessment where we had stuck a Proxmark inside of a coffee cup, a Grande Starbucks cup.
Yeah.
Had a little power pack in there too. And so I had that in my hand, and he had his Proxmark. We weren't sure if it's low frequency or high frequency, so I had mine set to low. He had his set to high in a muffin bag.
Yeah, I like muffins more than I should, so it was in a muffin bag.
So I had my hand on the coffee cup like this, and we were talking to somebody in the back while we were smoking with them. And their badges are just white badges. It doesn't have anything on it. So you just get a blank HID badge. I was like, hey man, I like your lanyard.
Done.
And so that was it. And then from there, cloned his badge and just emulated it. I didn't clone it. I just kept badging in with a coffee cup to the facility.
Yeah, and so one of the things we called out on that report was, so we tailgated the guy in from the first door, which didn't require badge, and then you have the guard desk, and then you had to badge in. So the funny thing was, this employee, he badged in, and then Tim was in front and holds up his coffee cup, and then I'm behind and I hold up this food bag. And the guy
We were
didn't
just wanting
even,
to see if the security guard would even pay attention. He
was-
wasn't even
he
looking
was
at the
like-
log or us. So
he was right here with, big glass windows and stuff, and he was like, I think he was playing a video game or something.
badge in with a
He
muffin.
wasn't watching us badge in with our Starbucks.
Yeah.
So again, this is just, for size, the ink pen next to the laptop.
If you don't
so-
wear like little kid pants like Brent does, it fits in your back pocket too. So if you're a bigger person, it does. I have put that in my back pocket, or the smaller your back, like Brent said.
Yeah.
It's really convenient.
Or if you wear yoga pants like Tim, they're stretchy enough
Right.
to stick in. I think this is GPD, not GDP. So, but I think Google will probably fix it for you. So one of my favorite tools is ridiculously cheap piece of plastic. I've gotten through more doors with this plastic shim than any other tool. Here's a quick video, and this just shows just how quick this attack is.
So this was into an executive's office.
I mean, I'll play it again. It's pretty fast.
Of course, they have
So-
like badge access control there, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and so anytime, and again, these attacks will show you ways to fix those too. So, yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Oh yeah, yeah. So like the slim or like the shim, there's the shove knife. There's several different tools like this. There's the little hook. I can't even think of the name of it right off.
Oh, the Shrum tool?
The Shrum tool. There's a lot
Yeah,
of different tools.
I'll show you. Let's see.
Yeah.
This, like, so the shove knife and then Shrum tool. That's $3, and I think that's $15.
In those miniature versions, there's some you can stick in your wallet. There's some you can make out of your hotel room key.
Yep.
You know, there's a lot of ways to do that. A lot of fire, I guess, like firefighters and stuff, they use these, but they're readily available at any kind of locksmithing, lock picking, a lot of stuff. Did you have a question? No.
Yeah, he asked, do we ever run into issues going through airport security? No.
I've been
Tim said,
stopped
yeah.
several times. Like, actually, Brent, like, shoves it in his bag in a weird way that...
Yeah, there's a
that,
certain
like,
angle. you
Yeah,
can
but
put
I get
things,
stopped a lot for my lock picks more, but this I've never been stopped for, which is interesting because it is about that long, you know. It's,
So that's an old wallet of mine. Here's my new one, and it's in there. The lock picks and things are. I need more hands. Yeah, so it's just easy to grab.
and if you are concerned about airport, again, you can just cut it out of your hotel room key.
So here's a quick video. Tim, you want to tell them what's going on in the video?
Yeah, so this is the back of a healthcare facility, I believe, or a financial facility. So they do like data processing for financial data. In the back, they had a PTC camera, but the dome was all scratched up and old, and it was like the sealant wasn't on there, so it was humid and moist inside. It was really bad. So, and like moist. And then later on, talking to security guards, even they said, yeah, it's obstructed. So we got to the back. There was just badge access. We just used the the shove knife.
So, yeah. Yeah, there's Tim.
What's funny about this facility, in some of these places, they're like, oh, you're not going to get in. We got a guard there, and they're armed, or they're blah, 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 and we got cameras everywhere.
So if you watch right here, it's really quick, but it like actually goes over the striker really quick and pulls it in. So
It's essentially kind of what you're doing with the old credit card through the door thing, but it's just pulling from the other side.
So a tool that I like to use, this is the only thing that's actually given me issues through TSA, and so I actually put it in a Pelican case with my gear, and I will check it. Because it's about this long, and it definitely looks like a weapon. This was made for by and for first responders, so it doesn't require a locksmith license. So you've heard people talk about, well, if you want to avoid things like the plastic shim attack, put a striker plate. Well, this thing goes over top of the striker plate and still does the same thing, so you're bypassing the striker plate, basically. And it's inourgear.net if you want to order some of these. He's a cool guy. I think he makes them in his garage or something, but he's really cool. So one of the things that I've done now, instead of carrying this large weapon-looking thing around with me, is I can also do the same thing. So this goes in the door, and then you just push it down, and then it bypasses that. And these are images from their website. So I just use a coat hanger and do the same thing. So I just snip here, and then I put a slight bend in it, and then I can actually go around the striker and just pull it open, and it's just a piece of coat hanger wire.
And if there's a big enough gap, you can get it around there and grab the bottom of the coat hanger too.
Yeah, just pull it towards you. So how do you fix that? All those attacks that we just talked about, the shove knife, the Shrum tool, the piece of plastic, the coat hanger, all of those things are possible for a couple of reasons. The main one being this security pin is usually not set properly. where it goes in the door, that's usually too wide, so the security pin is out. For it to actually work, it needs to be pushed in. So this is, whenever your door is shut, this needs to be engaged. When that's engaged, I'm not going to be able to shove a piece of plastic in there and bypass that latch. So just make sure, if you're not sure how to set that, have a locksmith come out. One of the issues that we've seen a lot in facilities is that it's usually maintenance guys that'll come install new locks and things. They don't really understand, you know, I don't mean to sound
Some of
mean.
them understand, but that's
Yeah.
not what they're specialized in, and so I think it goes back to the multiple hat thing. Oh yeah, where you're the desk admin. That means you're the security guard for the front too. You know, it's like you're giving too many people, you know, roles that they're not specialized in oftentimes.
Yep.
So the crash bar tool, this is another great tool. Sparrows has it. You know, we mentioned them because we do use a lot of their stuff. There's several other companies out there you can get these tools from. You can make your own tools. You know, the crash bar tool, if there's a big enough gap, you can just shove that in there and open it from the inside. It's essentially like the under the door tool for crash bars. And outside of the large one there, you know, it's about this size, but it's pretty heavy and dense. It's also sometimes difficult to get between. Unless there's a huge gap in the door, you can't really shove that thing in there. You know, some of the doors, like here, for
Yeah,
example,
like that's
that
a perfect
you could do
example
that.
here.
That's a huge
right
gap.
here.
But so one of the things that Brent did was he made this little tiny one, and it's not as dense and it bends when you pull, but it does work. You just have to reset it, and it's easy. It's lightweight. You can carry it in your bag. You can even put it in the small of your bag.
Yep.
So,
Or your yoga pants.
or your yoga pants.
So another tool, this is also made from the same company that I showed you with the Zauer tool that goes over the strike plate. This is a thumb turner tool. This is really useful in, let's see, retail locations.
Like with the sliding doors,
Yeah.
because there's usually you can pull it open enough to get a gap.
Yeah, so on this, you can see the tool going through the gap here. Once it's around, you position it on the thumb turner for the deadbolt, and then you actually turn the handle, and this turns, and you can open the deadbolt from the other side of the door. It requires a decent gap, which is pretty common at retail locations where the doors often slide open and shut, you know, glass doors typically.
It requires patience too. It's
Yeah.
not, you know, it's not something to just kind of pop in there like a Brent did with the plastic shim.
Yeah, it takes it a little bit longer.
So we mentioned the under the door tool. Many people are familiar with this. You can make it at home. Push button. Work.
There we go.
So this is me in a hotel room. So the under the door tool is really easy. You just slide it under the door. You catch the latch handle and you
Right.
pull down
See
on
it
it.
right there. There's, if you notice, okay, now it's behind the latch, and he's pulling the wire.
So almost every hotel that you stay in, this is vulnerable to. So, you know, a good way to prevent that is to shove a towel, rolled up towel in there, but or having the door guard. You know, one of the things that I love is being on site somewhere doing an assessment, and they have like a window, and then I can sit there, somebody can watch and be like, hey, go to the left, go to the blah blah blah. So don't have windows on your doors. Have, you know, make sure that you have the bottom and the sides and where the door seals, so I can't shove a tool under there. I was on site, we were doing a walkthrough, Brent and I, it was overt, so we were just going through saying, hey, let's just test this and this. They were like, you're not going to be able to shove that under the tool or under the door. I'm like, man, you're using you have carpet. I bet I can. And so
He was like, no, we've tested that. It's not going to work. And I'm like, okay, let's try it real
the
quick.
carpet has that give. So even if you do have that brush guard at the bottom or some kind of plate, note what kind of surface is beneath it, because that carpet it pushes down, especially to shove this thing under.
Yeah, and long story short, we opened the door with the under the door tool. What Tim was talking about, if you take a hand towel, roll it up really tight, and actually put it in there, it prevents the tool from being able to engage behind the lever handle. So just a little personal travel tip there.
Request to exit sensors. Those are some of the most exploited ways of getting into facilities that have especially biometric, like, or bio scans like retinal or fingerprint, you know, some kind of two-factor authentication that maybe you don't have time to sit there and try to bypass, and just use some canned air or use a vape pen or something. The thing is, the canned air is kind of loud. It is not as dense as something like a vape, so I wouldn't use that on site. But the canned air I do use on site. Brent and I have used this a number of times. The reason why is because of the density of the air, but also the temperature fluctuation. So a lot of these sensors, they are temperature variant. So it doesn't matter if it's too high or too low. If there's a change in that temperature, if there's a fluctuation in that temperature, and with the density of turning canned air upside down and having that cold gas spray out, it opens the door pretty easy.
Yeah, coupled with the actual motion of it. Can anybody tell me what's wrong with this rec sensor right here, just by looking at it? Yeah, location. That's exactly right. So if we spray the canned air through here or anything with motion and with the temperature variance, right away that's going to pick that up. So yeah, location. It needs to be further out, and it needs to be angled out in a way where it's only going to pick up motion and temperature from people actually heading to the door, instead of being close enough to actually like spray canned air or something.
You know, and you may have a temperature sensor that is just for warmth, and you're like, well, this will show your canned air. This is Brent and I in a server room, and they were so proud of these cages.
It was brand new place. They're like, we spent, you know, so much. It was a very large amount of money. Like they have retinal scanners, like all this stuff. Like, you guys aren't going to get in there. So this is us after we got in there, opening up these cages. There's a rec sensor over here on this side. I didn't have canned air, but Tim had his under the door tool, and I had hand warmers. So I have this little bracelet that says Hack the Planet on it, and I just wrapped it around there. And, you know, and so you can see wait for it. Okay, there we go. So here's the badge reader. It's red right now. Here in a second, once that goes up, if you look right there, and now it just turned green, and there we go. Just from
the warmth and motion.
Yeah, any sort of temperature variance, whether it's cold or warm, that's all that sensor looks for with motion.
And some of them are specific to just warmth. You know, even like the hand plates and stuff like that some people use in place of request for exit, you have to touch it. Same thing, it's heat.
Yeah, let's show it one more time. And the gap between those doors was just gigantic.
No, even the gap. I mean, just stick it through the fence. I mean,
yeah, I could just stick it through the fence.
I mean, so when you guys are, if you're decision makers or you're talking to your decision makers, you know, it doesn't matter. Be like, oh, look at this fancy, expensive cage I got here that's compliant with blah blah blah. Maybe, but look. So consider from the offensive perspective. You know, how would somebody try to break into this if they were really diligent? Another thing is that this did not go all the way to the ceiling. So if you had tiny fingers, like Brent and I couldn't do it, but if you were small, you could climb up and just climb over that fence.
Bring an InfoSec squirrel.
Yeah, or if you want to parkour over it or whatever, but it was interesting. And the way they had their cables ran, they had different areas caged off, so they had to be physically segmented. But the way their cables were ran at the top, there were these gaps. And so you could crawl through these gaps to get to the segmentation. So again, you know, their maintenance guys installed these. I mean, not discrediting maintenance, because there's some very, very intelligent maintenance people that work facilities and they do all that stuff. But just make sure that whoever's putting this stuff in considers the threats, not just, you know, the dollar signs.
Yeah, here's another just bypassing with canned air, so you can see what that looks like. And I'll show you.
And you don't even have to be that high. You can be from the bottom.
Yeah,
like I did it from the bottom of the door too, and it's still dense enough that it will reach that request for exit sensor.
Yep. So you can see again, it's here. It's pointed straight down at the door. If it were out a little bit and then angled further out, this would be extremely difficult to do from any height. So there's the sensor showing that. So how do you fix those things? How do you keep people from putting in, the crash bar tool or, bypassing our rec sensors with things like that? It's an astragal, so a metal astragal that basically fills that gap, covers that gap from the bottom all the way to the top of the door. That's a really quick way to sort of mitigate against those attacks. A lot of facilities use these. They work well, except if you tailgate someone and on your way through, you stick this up there. Obviously, try to make it look a little more neat than that. I had to snap the picture really quick. You can use gaffer's tape. You can get black gaffer's tape, and you can actually use it multiple times, and it doesn't leave residue or anything. But this, I was in a pinch, so some Scotch tape and a paper clip. Once you throw that up there and this closes, you can see it sticking out there. What happens now is the magnet, it's not strong enough, so even if that door is locked, someone hasn't been there a while and it's reset and it's locked, you can just walk up to it and just pull it open, just like a normal door.
But the badge reader will still show it as locked, so it's not tripping a sensor for a security guard to be like, wait a minute, this door is ajar.
Yeah, it doesn't show that it's propped open or anything, so quick tip. How do you fix that? Well, we've seen locations where they actually use, I can't remember the name of it. It's these mechanisms where the striker actually goes in the door. Those lock. They're like teeth, and they lock. And then once you swipe your badge, they unlock, and it lets you actually open the door.
I can't remember the name.
Yeah, and it actually gets rid of this altogether.
Or if you see a little gap up there, make sure there's not a paper clip.
Yep. So our number one way that we get into places, obviously, is tailgating. Just exploiting that part of humans where they naturally want to be nice. Most people avoid confrontation. There's so many different creative ways you can tailgate, all the way from being a guy that's having a very angry conversation on a phone to just sneaking in behind someone that's not really paying attention, or even showing up with pizza or balloons or something where people will say, oh, this guy's got his hands full, let me help him in.
The key to tailgating is to not look like you're tailgating. So, I know that sounds stupid, but retinal scanner, for example. So say I had badge and retinal. If you just pretend a badge and you catch that door, you're obviously tailgating, man. So go through the motion. It doesn't matter if it turns red or not. They often don't pay attention to the beep that it makes or the light color. Or just go through the motions of putting your eyes to the retinal scanner, standing there, doing your thing, or putting your fingerprint on there. If you're concerned about, your eyes being taken pictures of or something, whatever. But you have to go through those motions. You have to look like you're supposed to be there. And if you don't, then someone's going to turn around and be like, hey, wait a minute, you got a badge in.
Yeah, it was pretty recently when we got into this one place, we were going through the motions, and the guy that we were actually following in, Tim was putting his eye down to the retinal scanner, and the guy was like, you don't have to use that. It's not hooked up right. And he still let us in.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. And then another facility recently, too, is when we were following this lady in after a smoke break. She badged in, the receptionist was there, and so Tim, he was badging in, and it was like, it beeped, but obviously it didn't work. And then I didn't even have a badge. I just walked up to it and gave it a high five just to see if she was paying attention like that, and then just walked right on in. So just if you have the kind of show that confidence, and you just get it in your mind like, I'm supposed to be here, I work here, and get that mindset, that actually will show through with your body language. And people can pick up, if you have a really nervous, awkward energy, people will pick that up, and you're going to stand out. So
also, if you're paying your security guards, whether it's like a contractor or whatever, if they've got the badge log in front of them, this is a way to help, because everybody, it doesn't matter how much security awareness training you take, it doesn't matter how security conscious you are, people get in the routine of doing the everyday grinds, and you're coming in and out, whatever. Tailgating has always been a problem. I've been doing this for at least 6 years, and that is the number one way I first get in, usually if it's within production hours or business hours. And so the way to prevent that, security guards, look at the logs, make sure it's separate. There are different, logs. It's not the same dude badging in several times with a coffee cup and a muffin. It's not, you know, somebody forgetting to badge in. It's just one dude and 3 guys walked in, you know, so looking at that stuff.
Yeah, I know if you guys have probably been hammered to death with security awareness training this, security awareness training that. One of the things that we really like to suggest with security awareness training, because it is important, I'm not knocking that at all, is do regular assessments, even if it's employees to say, hey, so-and-so, next week can you just walk in without your badge and see if anybody says anything, and then let people know, hey, this is going to be an ongoing thing. If you catch someone doing that, then you go in for a drawing for a gift card or something, like a $100 Amazon gift card. That way people are going to pay attention and be like, oh, is it you? Were you the one I was supposed to catch? And then kind of make a game out of it and just let people know, understand the importance of it. So just a way to incentivize people to let them, you know, give them a reason to actually care.
And also, you know, outside of just the quarterly or annually security awareness point-and-click training that a lot of corporations and agencies do, and it needs to be a cultural shift. It's not just cyber threats either. It's physical threats to safety of workers, of people, of the facility, of a lot of things. So of an angry former worker coming in. An active shooter situation, things like that. These are all part of physical security. It's not just the cyber threats. You know, us getting in and putting in a Dropbox or getting access to your core switch, yeah, that's awesome, but what if I come in with an explosive or something, you know? So, of course, we don't test for that stuff, but those are things that need to be considered. Even in your tabletop exercises for disaster recovery, if you guys do business continuity and disaster recovery tabletop exercises, this is also an excellent avenue to help say, hey, here's what on-site physical, social engineering, or covert threats might be.
Yep. So one of the things that I've been playing with is if we do clone a badge, trying to clone a badge, but there's some sort of two-factor authentication with PinPad or something. Something we can do is I can get a highlighter, not the ones that are like, you know, smudge resistant because those dry really fast. But if you can find like an old school Sharpie, send them all to me. Or if you want to keep one for yourself, what you can do is run up and you can paint all the numbers really quick with a Sharpie.
Not like a black Sharpie, like a...
Yeah, just a normal Sharpie. And this really only works if they are metal buttons. If they're plastic, obviously it's going to kind of dry on there a little bit, or the rubber doesn't really work as well. So you paint that, and once someone badges in, you can run up to it and turn on the little pocket UV light, and it will show you the buttons that they push. It'll show their fingerprints on that. So that helps to reduce the amount of guesses that you have to have with trying to guess their PIN if you're unable to shoulder surf and see it as they punch it in.
Yeah, these aren't like 12-digit pins or anything. I mean, it's just, they're usually like a combination of 4s.
Yeah.
So.
And this next one, shout out to Deviant Olam on this. He's done a lot of research for items that use the same key that have been rekeyed. And so from that, you know, watching his talks, you have basically a master door keying key for this access control. So basically, when you see these door keys and it is rekeyed, this is my key ring. You can just walk up to it and open it, pull the panel open, and there's a postal button on one side. So you can just push that and it will open whatever door is assigned to that. So you don't even have to have a badge or anything. So if you look up Deviant's talk from Wild West Hackfest last year, he'll go through this, and it's basically the keys that are common for filing cabinets. And so it is this key. I can't remember. That's like a C1 or 220 or something like that. I should have written it down for you guys, so sorry for not doing that. But basically, this key is used for jukeboxes, RVs, security panels, many things, and they're usually keyed the same. So just by having this, you have a good chance of being able to open numerous things. Same thing with these common filing cabinet keys, and then, as I mentioned, it's basically like a master door key. The thing that's kind of sucks about this, I bought all of these, I bought most of them from Amazon, and the other 2 from a key service that sells to the public. So it wasn't anything you know, as like in depth, it was a simple Google search.
So when we do get in, like, so if we're not wanting to do social engineering, for example, the fire escape, usually those sensors are turned off during production hours because it's ingress, egress, people go in and out, or they go out, it may just be exiting. So for lunch especially, you know, you can catch those doors. But if you're trying to do it during after hours or during business hours or something like that, picking those locks, you know, you got to make sure that the fire alarm is disabled. But it's usually a generic tumbler lock on some of these fire escape doors. So during production hours, it's kind of easy to pick those very quickly instead of looking a little shady there, trying to pick a lock in the middle of the day.
With your hacker hoodie and ski mask
And
on.
your Hack 5 stickers and fat patches everywhere.
Your shirt that says, "I'm going to rob you." Stay away.
Service elevators. Another thing is a lot of elevators, some companies and agencies, they have badge restricted floors. Or even the elevator, you can't even go anywhere. You get on there, it's like, oh crap, I got to scan my finger or I got to scan my badge. You know, there's some talks out there on how to bypass this. There's some elevator keys you can get to, some of the older elevators, but just go to the service elevator, and if they have that, usually that goes to every floor.
Yeah, so this particular one went to, as Tim said, it went to every single floor, and there was no requirements for any sort of authentication. And the cool thing about service elevators too is they're typically off of like a main lobby or any sort of high traffic area. They're usually sort of back in different hallways or something because they tend to keep the high traffic like maintenance or sanitation or whatever it might be. They don't really want those things going through like the main lobby where there might be clients or things like that. So you're out of view typically, and you usually have like unrestricted access to what floor you want to go to. So now we're gonna pick on padlocks for a little bit.
So
Can you see, real quick, can you see a common theme over here for the pictures we've used?
Master. Yeah. So people think, you know, master lock, oh, whatever. We see master locks everywhere. I mean, there'll be some like very secure facilities. They'll spend thousands of dollars on their electronic controls and their fences and their gates and their
All the
super
sensors
strong.
on all the stuff.
Yeah, and then they got this like a master lock number 5 on it or something. You know, it's some of these are they're just super crappy locks, and you know, if you can't pick them, then you know you can usually shim them, and it's pretty easy to do. Even the combo locks and things like that. That's how. I mean, even with the 2 teeth, it doesn't matter.
This one, if you stare at it hard enough, it opens.
You know, some of those videos you've seen, like, you know, people hitting them, you bang it on the side with a rock, and it opens. I mean, it's kind of like the movies. It works. Some ways to fix it. You know, this isn't like the most secure way, but, you know, cheaper alternatives to a better than master lock, tumbler lock, like a crappy, you know, one like we had listed. There's a few we list here, some suggestions. You know, I know a lot of people use dimple locks too. Dimple locks can be picked too.
It takes
it's harder.
time. It takes time, but it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically you get what you pay for with that, and don't always go for something that you can just run out to a hardware store and pick up real quick. Put some time and research into it. And again, these are usually the most trusted.
Yeah, and you may not think, oh, okay, well, it's just the power generator. Well, yeah, it's a power generator. That goes off. I mean, you may have your backup power supply, but, you know, that's still going to put some damage in there, right?
That would be a considered denial of service attack?
Probably. Yeah.
So we only have a few minutes left, so we'll kind of go through here. So this is a new tool, or new to us. Anytime we see exposed hinge pins, you can just walk up to that and take a bump hammer for bump keys or an actual hammer, and just pop them, and you can actually hit them enough where they'll shoot up, and you just catch them in the air with your hand, and then set the door aside and go in. That's usually better for after hours.
Or if you're pretending to be doing, like you're with the facility. Taking pictures of keys, this works sometimes. This actually worked with us once. We got into a facility, into the security control room, picked a crappy wafer lock aluminum box. In there they had a bunch of keys to their vehicles. They also had the hard copy key to an alternate data facility. So we were supposed to visit that facility the next week. So we're like, oh, well, that's handy. So we took a picture of it, went to Lowe's, went back to the hotel, and played arts and crafts until we filed a key that mimicked the size, and we were able to get into there by using a key that we took a picture of. So other people have done this too. This isn't like some crazy, magic. It's common, especially if you use some crappy locks that just have, basic tumbler locks and such.
Yeah, and something too, it's not listed here, but if you move into a new facility that you're renting or something, or even a house you just bought from somebody, first thing you should do is change the locks, because you don't know who still has a key from the previous owners. So you should do that. And real quick, I know again we're running low on time. Badge emulation. A simple Google search usually it will show employees at some sort of a party or barbecue or something within the company, or hey, I'm so happy with my new job. Here's a badge for my new job. So before we even show up, we know what we can do just for a quick Photoshop to create some badges.
Yeah, just look at look at Instagram or Twitter. You can find tons of people posting. Another thing, like barcodes, they'll post like their student IDs and they'll post their work IDs, and then it's got the barcode on there. They won't think anything of it, and then you just scan it with one of your phone apps.
Yeah.
Read the barcode, and it's got your social in there.
Yeah, cool.
That's neat.
So badge cloning. We use everything that you can buy online real easy. Proxmark 3, Proxmark 3 Easy. Simple badge cloning. So this is a tool that I love from Dangerous Things. So you can walk up to any sort of badge reader and it will light up and let you know if it's reading in low frequency or high frequency.
So that's handy when you don't have like a muffin or with a high frequency muffin and a low frequency coffee. Then it's just the size of a business card. It's self-powered. It's not.
Yeah, it doesn't require a battery either, which is cool. Badge interception, again, if there's a badge reader or something in a parking garage or something, we just implant some devices, basically pull it off the wall, implant it, go sit in our car. Depending on which model you use, you can connect via Bluetooth or via Wi-Fi. And as people scan their badges, we then get those numbers. And that's where it would be handy for painting the pen pad, like I showed earlier, with the Sharpie, and then running up.
Or replaying it. The Bleaky will let you replay the last scanned badge on it, some of those.
So here's where we're talking about badge cloning. One of the things we love to do is to actually put this inside of a clipboard. I was talking about the physical with the hospital. We do this all the time. We'll have it hidden in the clipboard. We'll go up to people and say, hey, we're doing badge inventory. You see your badge, and they'll hand it to us, and we'll set it on there and write some numbers down, but we just clone their badge.
Especially if you've got a long name or a complex name. It's like, can I borrow your...
So
kind of write your name down and get close enough to write it with the badge.
Yeah, here's the low frequency muffin and high frequency coffee in there. And it's so easy to do, just be creative about it. So many ways you could hide those. Here's a quick video of, we had to sanitize a lot. Basically, Tim went up to a security guard, cloned his badge, and then to get to the man trap with his Proxmark, he's just basically walking and replaying it, and you see the glass just opened to go in. So.
Security guard was nice, though. He was easy to talk to.
USB attacks. Don't do this. This is the service desk. This is the computer. There's the USB ports. On the opposite side, don't do that.
Social engineering, we won't get into this too much, but I think one of the guises that we use quite often is that we're doing an enterprise security assessment, or we're doing an internal audit for badge access control, or we're doing a NIST audit. Like just saying something like that.
Just a bunch of things. We heard your network is slow. We're going to check that out.
Yeah,
that's great. Networks are always slow.
Right, and if there's two of us, one of us will be the employee there as kind of the escort, and the other is the vendor or the contractor. And that way he can ask me and interject, and we can play off each other. So it's easier to do with multiple people. Sometimes it's easier to do with one person. But yeah.
There's another one. There's Tim putting in a keylogger while I'm talking to this lady here. This one, we're talking to the security guard. She let Tim get behind the desk. This is the binder full of badges. He has his clipboard back there cloning badges.
Having a good time,
Having a good time. Keyloggers, I like to put on the things that I'm actually going to implant and leave. I like to put with gaffer's tape, write in big letters, do not remove. That way if someone sees it, like, I'm not going to touch that. This is basically the USB rubber ducky, but it has a Wi-Fi access point in it. So you can plug that in and walk away. It's got a pretty good distance on it for, you know, pretty good range. You can inject commands that way. Here's the land. You can see the land turtle. Do not remove.
You know, you can
Speed
put
test,
drop
do not
boxes,
remove,
yeah. Like,
It's
you know,
the
your
common
Raspberry
theme.
Pi, you got a Dropbox or whatever.
The
If
old
you've got an
school
old
phone
school
plug.
phone plug, like. we used
I
to
mean,
use.
air freshener. It's
Air
an
freshener, yes. You know, don't, like, it's funny on the right here, these are the employee records. I got into the HR office, and the employee records, they had on the tab the last name and the first name, and then they had their social security number on the tabs. And so they were
Right,
all
yeah.
organized by that. I didn't have to look through, I could just take a picture of all the records, like the files, the tabs.
This is a security access control room we got into. This is me disabling security cameras.
Also, if you got, you know, don't have your vending machines next to your server room if you don't have floor to ceiling walls.
Yeah. This is right outside of a cafeteria right at lunchtime, and people were coming in and out. And some people looked, but nobody ever said, like, hey, guy, why is your head in the ceiling on top of our
So I
vending
just crawled
machine?
over and got into the data center from there. Your shredder bins, don't do that. Those shredder bins suck.
I
Don't
feel
use
like
them.
an auctioneer. It's like,
Yeah. Oh, but
yeah, 20 years old.
So.
Yeah, unlock stations, lock your stuff when you walk away. Don't leave keys. And then this is a ladder in the video I showed earlier, bypassing the cage. They left ladders in every cage for us.
That's where the cables
So-
are
Yeah.
ran at the top.
So,
there. That's
you know,
awesome.
there you go. Don't put things like this on doors or anything, because that's what I'm going to go for.
There's usually snacks in those, though.
Yeah.
So.
Don't leave Post-its. Don't use these things. Yes, we've seen things like
People
this.
actually use that.
Clear text findings, and it's awesome.
All right, I'm just going to let you guys, if you want to take a picture of this.
And it'll
Sure.
be online too.
It's, you know, again, we mentioned this earlier, it should be security culture, it shouldn't be just basic security awareness training. Clean desktop policies, minimum baseline
Sorry,
configurations.
there you go. Do this in 1 second.
Oh, my bad.
Take a picture, but I'll change it before you get your phone.
You got to be
out.
quick.
Jeez. Desk policy, and then last one, yeah. We found this as a Google search, but you would be surprised on some of the really stupid stuff you see. I don't have time for any more war stories. If you guys have questions, we'll be outside of the room. Really appreciate you listening.
Yeah, so it's very, very
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we don't. Okay, yeah, I know we have it's a very big, very big company, so there's a lot of people I haven't had the chance to really work with.
for the HDMI adapter though. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. I'm good. All right, hello everyone. Can everyone hear me? Yes, no? Okay. I'm Bryce Birchall, and this talk is called The Making of iOS 11 Jailbreak, Kitty to Kernel Hacker and 14 Sleepless Nights. This is kind of my journey when I learned about iOS and the kernel. So let me tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll jump right into it because we have a lot of stuff to cover. The name of this talk comes from Atlas's, The Making of Atlas, from Kitty to Hacker and 5 Sleepless Nights. And he kind of inspired me when I was just a skitty, and I've been playing CTF ever since. You know, that was 13 years ago. I've been playing CTF for 13 years. I've been a DEF CON Open CTF organizer for the past 4, and I've been with Coalfire, the company, for the past 2. And as of a year ago, I used to be afraid of kernels. I came to DerbyCon last year and took a class called Windows Kernel Primer by the Hungry Hackers. I'm sure people saw it last year. And it was amazing. It was a real eye-opener to go like, hey, this isn't magic. This isn't rocket science. This is just normal stuff, and you can get through it. So what we're going to be talking about today is XNU. And this is the kernel that Apple uses for all their devices. So the Macs, the iPhones, the iWatches, even the touch bar is running its own kernel, it has its own RAM, it does its own thing. So Apple uses this everywhere, and it's kind of this duct taped together bastardization of Open Software Foundation Mach kernel and the FreeBSD 4.3 kernel. And so it's kind of like the combination, they took this microkernel, Mach is a microkernel, it's super small, barely does anything, but does it very efficiently. And then they kind of duct tape FreeBSD onto it to get all the functionality of FreeBSD. And it supports all those architectures listed up there. They dropped PowerPC because they don't make PowerPC machines anymore, which is fine. But the real kicker, and why kind of all this stuff came about, is that Apple open sourced the kernel, the XNU kernel, back in 2017. And this has always been closed source. Everyone has been like, you know, only the leadest of lead can get access to like the code, or they have to struggle through and reverse engineer it. And so a lot of open source security research has been performed, especially by Google Project Zero, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's kind of the impetus to this whole thing. So I do have a little bit of a warning. There is going to be a lot of C in here. But don't be afraid of the complexity that we're doing. We're taking simple abstractions, we'll call them Lego blocks, and we'll build like a building, all right? And complexity is our friend, because there are the bugs that we're using to exploit iOS are a result of this building complexity in the operating system. So just to say, the kernel is not, it's not black magic. It's not that complicated. And that's a little bit of a lie. It is complicated, but each individual piece is understandable and digestible. You know, going from arrays of just like a sequence of things in memory to structs, sequence of things in memory with types associated with them, to linked lists, which are just structs that have a pointer to another struct. And then upon those kind of basic, dumb computer science models, we can build all of the abstractions that the kernel uses. And I'm sure everyone here is familiar with like how heaps work. You kind of ask for memory, it gives it to you, you hand it back, it takes care of it. It's all garbage collected, it's not under kind of your jurisdiction. And so that's what the power of like using these building blocks gives you. Now there's a couple of abstractions that are XNU specific, so TAS and Mach ports are the two that are just slightly different than other operating systems. So a task in XNU is very analogous to the eProcess structure inside of Windows. It's a collection of everything that the kernel needs to know about a program to run it. So like the state, where it lies, what permissions it has, where its memory is mapped, is it memory mapped or is it paged down? So it's just a collection of data surrounding a process, and it's all built out in a nice little struct that we'll see later. And then the next thing, which is different from a lot of other operating systems, is ports. Mach ports are a derivative of a real-time operating system's kind of IPC. And this is what Apple heavily relies on when they duct tape BSD and XNU together. So Mach ports are just like mailboxes. You say, hey, I have a mailbox, then that makes you responsible for receiving messages coming out of it. And then you can give your address to someone else and they can send you messages. And you can give your address just once, or you can give it permanently. So just think of a port as a mailbox. And so as we move further and we build up complexity, it's just a mailbox. It's just a way of talking to the kernel. And so when we look at the entire kernel, there's a lot to it, but we only care about the user space, because we're living in user space. We're trying to jump into the kernel. How we get and how we talk to the kernel is with the IPC mechanisms, such as Mach ports, which we're going to dive deeply into, and then the kernel task. Everything else doesn't really matter for what we're looking at. We don't need the extra complexity. We're not doing baseband exploitation. So what we're really excited about is how we can talk from a user space task down to the kernel task, all right? And so why do we even want to jailbreak iOS? Well, there's a couple reasons. Like, I like having full control over my device. I like the ability to have root on all my boxes. I do, as part of my job, I do mobile app testing. I need jailbroken iPhones to do this because, as you know, if you try and download an app from the App Store, it's encrypted per device. And so there's a plethora of reasons, but if we move forward and we say, all right, what are our prerequisites? We need to have some way of interacting with the system, so either SSH or web, what have you. We need root, and there are multiple definitions of root, as we'll see coming up here soon. And then we need to be able to run our own code, because we want to build our own tools, we want to do security research, we want to break things, right? And so what we need is an exploit. Exploits cost money, but that's why there hasn't been a lot of jailbreaking since 10, or before 10. There was a big kind of lapse between 8.4 and 10. And these exploits are worth a lot of money, so a lot of people haven't been doing work on them. However, when Apple decided to decrypt its kernel caches, all of a sudden, this is like their prerequisite to open sourcing the kernel. All of a sudden, everyone can see the kernel cache and do reverse engineering on it. Google went, okay, let's put Project Zero on this, and they set up a bunch of research people and started looking for bugs in this, and then they decided to release them openly. And so that's why we have kind of the bugs used to break iOS. So this guy, Ian Beer from Google Project Zero, tweeted in early December, hey guys, keep your devices locked on 11.1.2. Now, as kind of context, nobody had released an exploit for 11. Like this is new territory. There's a lot of changes from 10, and it was kind of a big deal at the time. And then he followed through on his promise a couple days later, and he released an exploit getting task for PID 0. So, what is task for PID 0? In XNU, root does not equal root. So, say in the Linux kernel, or in Windows, if you're a system, you can talk to kernel processes. You can't in XNU, because there is layers of protections against it. Apple kind of designed a lot of things away from the user and to try and create this sandbox environment for their applications. So what task for PID does, if you all are familiar with like ptrace on Linux, task for PID gives you introspection into another process. And so when we say task for PID 0, we want to talk about that kernel task shown previously in that graph. So that lets us look into the kernel structures and see what's going on and play with those structures. And you can do anything, like you can do crazy things with these mock VM star calls. You can write, you can create threads, you can create memory spaces, you can remap, you can change all this stuff. But Apple, knowing that, yeah, of course, jailbreakers are going to use this, decided to say, all right, you try and get a task port for the kernel? No, we're not going to give it to you, which kind of sucks. But the reason that task for PID in the context of jailbreaking is better than kernel code execution is because of the hardware built-in protections on the device, okay? So in ARM, which all your iPhones are running, you're either running 32-bit or 64-bit, you have 4 execution modes, which are analogous to like x86, rings of privilege, right? So everything in user land runs in ring 0. The kernel code runs in exception level 1. They don't really use exception level 2. Well, that's built for hypervisors. I haven't really seen people use EL2, but it'd be interesting to see. And then they have this process in EL3 called Watchtower, right? And this is your kernel patch protection. It goes through memory, and it hashes every single page of memory inside of EL1, the kernel space, and then compares it to see if it's been modified. If it is, it borks the kernel, everything goes down. So that's why we want task for PID 0. We don't necessarily want kernel code execution. So when Ian Beer released the set of bugs, he labeled them async wake because they were part of the IOKit derivative libraries. And there were 2 bugs that he released, an information leak in the kernel, and then a use after free. And then he kind of nicely wrapped them up into an exploit chain for us. The information leak is needed because the kernel, upon boot, has 9 bits of random entropy in where it's loaded into memory. On Linux, I think this is 12. On Windows, it's 14. I'm guessing at 14. But so it's kernel address space randomization. You can't rely on rock gadgets. You can't rely on other data structures being present if you don't have an information leak. And so hopefully, oh no, can't read that. Okay, I will talk through it. The information leak he discovered is part of a function called procinfo. Now, procinfo just gives you your process info, or if you're root, it gives you other processes info. He found a bug in where you can supply the list of pointers, and it'll tell you if those pointers are inside of the space. Okay? So inside of this function, they do this division down with integer division, and then they repopulate it, and then all of a sudden, if you can bypass Apple's protections down by the bottom, it'll copy out your buffer to user mode. And I guess the exploit is the easiest way of seeing this. Here's the information getting leaked out right here, that plus 7. So when you request this information and you don't give it a full pointer size, which in 64-bit is a Q word, so 8 bytes, you give it 8 bytes plus 7, all of a sudden, it'll give you the extra 7 bytes, and then you have a 7-byte information leak. Now, he wrapped it up in a function and then ran it over the top 100 processes, I think like 1,000 times, and did some statistical analysis to determine, okay, what's the most popular kernel pointer that's coming back? Because you can see all kernel pointers begin with that 00, FFFFF, and then 8. And then after that, you can derive the kernel slide, where the kernel lies in memory. Okay, bug number 1. Bug number 2 is kind of a systemic bug due to the mock interface generator. Now, there's kind of a history behind this. Apple goes and creates all these extra layers upon layers and layers, and they don't really have the single point of history that, say, like the Linux kernel has, where like 1 or 2 people know from the very beginning what every single thing does. So it's kind of like institutional knowledge. So they have these MIG generators that it's a bunch of C code that writes more C code. So yes, there are bugs here. There are a ton of bugs here. And this specific bug lies in the IO Surface user client. And Ian Beer talked about this in his that brief history of mitigation, the path to EL1 and iOS 11. And it's a combination of, there are predefined requirements for this MIG interface. If you say, hey, I am going to run a function and it returns an error, you're responsible for cleaning up the memory. If it doesn't return an error, the kernel takes care of it. And so the bug here is that IO Surface user client doesn't properly clean up its memory after it receives an error. So the exploit code for this is just to run it 3 times, it'll bork, and then you have a floating task port in memory, in kernel memory. So it's pretty cool. It's a pretty interesting bug. How are we doing on time? Okay, good. So this is kind of the exploit food that he's come out of this. I don't necessarily think we need to deep dive into this because as jailbreakers, we're looking at this as like, oh, this is a Lego block I can build on. I can build on this primitive that gives me this task for PID 0. But as you can see, he does a lot of heap feng shui. He builds out a fake kernel task port and sprays that across memory using his use after free, and then all of a sudden we have a task for PID 0, which is now, all right, we can access the kernel. Yay. So I ran the exploit, and it was super exciting. Absolutely blank screen. But if you look at the Xcode and the console debug output, you'll see it starts to, it has some information, and then all these numbers start to increment down, and then you hit 199, and then some more information, and then all of a sudden, boom, we have this ability to talk to the kernel pointer, or we are able to have a task port to talk to the kernel. Yay, all right. So now with this in mind, let's go ahead and jailbreak the system, okay? So this terrible graph was maybe 12 days in or 11 days in when I got really, really desperate, and I couldn't figure out how to do one of the things, and so I'll go into that later. But we have a couple things that we have to do to hit our original prerequisites, right? We want to get root. We have to bypass as many sandbox limitations as feasible. We have to turn the hard drive on as read-write, so we have full control over that, because normally it comes just read-only. And that's Apple's way of protecting it against just rogue apps that somehow break out. Then there is this idea called platformization, right? Platformization is a flag in memory saying, hey, I'm an Apple binary, I can do what I want. And that really helps us accomplish our goals in getting full control over the system. And then adding entitlements. Entitlements are a series of permissions that are defined and signed by Apple. And as we go through later and we see all the signing stuff, everything Apple gives out has a privilege. So as you as a developer, you get certain privileges, Apple gets certain privileges, enterprises get certain privileges, and you can't go above that. I want to give myself the ability to get crazy entitlements, but I can't because my certificate chain shows that I am not entitled to do this. So we need to bypass that. So let's start at the beginning and break it down because it looks really complicated. We'll break it down. So getting root is super analogous to token stealing on Windows. Windows, you iterate through the processes and you grab the credentials out of the eProcess struct in process 4, which is system. We do the same thing. We just look for the kernel task, and then we copy their credential pointer. We're root. So you think, okay, this is kind of gobbledygook. Let's look at Apple's sources. Apple's released their sources, and inside of the process headers for how they store processes in the kernel, you can see, all right, we have a struct proc, we have a linked list at the top, and then we have our process ID. Okay, this is pretty easy to follow. We have our user permissions, our UID, our GID, and our UID, and then down at the bottom, we got our credential structure. So it's as simple as setting our permissions to 0, the root user, and then we just copy the credential pointer out of the kernel task process, and we copy it into ours. And this is kind of analogous with these two lines right here, and these are kind of just for posterity and later for further inspection. So that's all we needed to do to get root. But like I said previously, root on XMU is not root. So there's other sandbox limitations that we have to start bypassing. So in creation of pages of memory, there are certain restrictions applied that Apple uses as a competitive advantage. Okay? So the ability to create a read, write, and execute heap is page is very important to high performance things. So think Chrome, think Firefox, think Safari. They have JIT engines that turn JavaScript into native assembly and run that. This is how Apple keeps their competitive advantage in their browsers. They don't allow anyone else, except for Safari, to have read, write, execute pages so that everyone else's browser runs slowly. Don't ask me why. So, as I mentioned previously, the root directory is mounted as read-only. Binaries can only be run in certain directories. You are not allowed to run anything out of temp. There's several policies in place on the system that look as you perform an exe sous vide, and if they say, oh, no, you're coming from a bad place, I'm not going to let you run. Okay. Our entitlements are bad. We're not a platform binary. And as of right now, you need a developer certificate to properly sign code to run on the device. But we don't want that. We want to run anything. So let's go ahead and remount the drive. And it's as simple as this. It's almost as simple as that. What we're doing is we're just doing a mount update of type Apple file system to the root drive, and we're going. Now, the reason that this didn't work initially, and I was ripping my hair out going like, what, this should work, was because of these flags. So when the root file system is identified upon boot, these flags are applied to it in its vnode structure. And we'll get into that in a minute. But it's defined as read-only, and then as it's a root file system. So those flags put together when it's first mounted say, nope, this can never be read-write, this is read-only. So I ran around online and I found somebody who had an idea. Let's swap those flags out, let's remount it, and then we go. So it's actually pretty easy. It's pretty easy. We looked at the kernel structures, and there is a master vnode. And the vnode is just a type, it's a data type. I just think of it that way. It's an easy way of saying, here I have a file, I have drive, what have you. So we look at the master vnode inside of the kernel, and then we look in the structure. And I do apologize for the tiny text, but there is mount at the very bottom. And where that mount points to, we have a flag. So great. Now we know, all right, if we change the structure all of a sudden, and then we remount it, we'll get root, or we'll get a read-write file system. And that's essentially what we do. The code above does parsing into the kernel, and if you look at the jailbreak I've put on GitHub, this is why it only works for a certain type of kernel, is because I've hard-coded the root vnode address. But that aside, all we are doing is we're parsing into that structure, we're flipping those bits. I'm not sure the right term for this, but the inverse of 1 is E, and the inverse of 4 is B. So just think of those bits being set. So we just and that, so we turn them off, we remount the drive, and then we quickly put them back. So, easy enough. All of a sudden, the root drive is now read-write, and we can do whatever we want with the file system, which is dangerous, which is why you should be careful about package installers. They might actually fork your device. That's another story. So platformization. What do we need platformization for? Well, it gives us the ability to talk to other processes is the main thing that we care about. There's a couple other attributes to it, but we need to say, hey, I need to talk to task for PID for whatever PID I want, okay? And again, it's our friendly proc structure that we've already seen, and it has a task pointer. We look in the task pointer, we look down, and there are our flags. And there you go. That's all you have to do. There's the C pseudocode up top and then the actual C code below. All we have to do is OR our flags with 400, and then we're good to go. And this is all live. This is all live. We don't have to refresh anything. We don't have to do anything. We just say, make it so, and then any further call in the kernel, it checks that value, and we're good to go. So at this point, I think I was like 11 days deep and going like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do entitlements. Entitlements are a little more complicated. And so I ended up reversing Chillin, which is a jailbreak by Jonathan Levin, and he open sourced it. He gave out the object files and a header, and was nice enough not to strip the object file. So reverse engineering was fairly easy. But there is the here be dragons part on the bottom right-hand side, where I was like, I don't really know what to do here. But using his code as kind of a reference, I went through and I said, okay, why, or like how, in the process of building out how we get our entitlements, here are the reasons why we need them, okay? So going back to the whole, root on XNU is not really root. There are several things that make you not root when you're root. And one of the things is AMFI. AMFI is the Apple Mobile File Integrity Daemon. And it's always running on the system, but we'll get into that later. Without an entitlement for task for PID, even though we're platformized, it doesn't work because the system checks our entitlements and our flag that we previously set. So Apple, in their wisdom, uses XML for everything. You want some bugs? They do XML interpretation in the kernel. Go look at that. So the entitlements that we need are specifically, I should have put them in order, but we need task for PID allow, we want kernel system override, we want unsigned code, we want to do all the things on the system. But we don't have that, and we can't have that because we don't have an Apple certificate. We only have a developer certificate at this point. So it's just like before. We have a couple structures to process through, and starting with the proc structure, which we've done previously, we jump into our vnode, because processes are vnodes as well. It's just an object. And then inside of the vnode, there is an internal code signing section. And this code signing section, Apple uses as part of their X509 chain of certificates to build out who are you, what sort of entitlements you have, what sort of code can you run. But it's actually pretty easy to modify. All you have to do is look at the size, because you need to keep that in mind when we rewrite the blob in memory. And then we just need a pointer to our entitlements blob, and then we need a pointer to where it stores the hash. So what our plan of attack is, we're going to put our new entitlements in. We're gonna SHA-256 them up, and then we're gonna write our hash to where it expects it. And then we need to overwrite the old entitlements blob with our new one. So it's simple. We're just replacing them, right? So the code for that is more involved, and I won't get into that. But the idea is conceptually there. All we have to do is just replace our entitlements and move on. So they're looking at the full sandbox limitations. So there are some things that we can't touch. We can't create read, write, execute pages. We have turned the root directory and read, write, but there are some policies still in place where we can't run binaries. There's not much we can do about that except for create binaries on the root of the file system. We've platformized ourselves, we fixed our entitlements, and now our last hurdle to get over is running unsigned code. So running unsigned code is not possible, kind of. So this Amphi daemon will check every single executable, and if it doesn't properly have the signatures in place and then the certificate chain in another section of the binary, it just kills it. It's like, nope, nope, you're not on the system. But, I mean, we are root-ish. We are a platform binary. We now have Apple privileges, and we have these super awesome entitlements. We are entitled to do pretty much anything on the system. So I looked at kind of the code flow when you create a process, right? So when you create a process using, say, like POSIX spawn, because this is touching the FreeBSD part of the kernel, you call execve or whatever in your C, and then it pops up the kernel. It goes like, hey, I have a request for a task. All right, bring it over to Amphi. Amphi, you should check it, and then it brings it back down to userland. Amphi daemon is running in userland. It does the checking in userland. This does not make any sense, but hey, it works. So let's attack the user space process. I don't know why they don't do code signing in the kernel, but all right. So there's two ways of doing this. One, Amphi has a cache of known hashes of files that it's already verified, so it doesn't have to do the work. So you have a commonly run process, the hash is already there. Or we can patch it and create a custom error handler to catch any errors when it dies, and then we put in a bug. So it crashes every single time it tries to run a binary. And so this is what I went with. So Amphi is like a tiny binary. All it has is just some function pointers, some callouts. Like that is like an accurate representation of how big that file is. It is pretty tiny. So you can pop it up and like, I use Binary Ninja. I popped that up and then there, and then I looked at the address, the offset to this MIS validate signature function. That gets called when the kernel wants, hey, check this binary, see if it's valid. So what we're going to do is we're going to put in a non-canonical 64-bit address. That thing is going to crash every single time. So then we set up an exception handler. And like I said previously with mock ports, they're just mailboxes, right? We tell the kernel, hey, anytime this process dies, send me a message. Send me its register state, send me its memory, send me its stack, anything else that's going on with the system. And so that's what that is. We can create a separate process to deal with this, and it'll handle all of Amphi's deaths as we kill it repeatedly. So once we've triggered a fault inside of Amphi by running a program, now we need to actually handle it and return the value true, because all the kernel text is looking for is, hey, userland Amphi, is this process signed? Oh, great, it is. Let's run it. So all we have to do is set up some registers with the new hash, and then we write a 1, as in like true, into x20, and then we set up the old state, which is, if you're familiar with x86, the link register is essentially your first thing on your stack. That's a bad analogy, but it'll work. And then we just say, hey, all right, everything's good, keep running, go. So, I have a live demo. Let's see if this works. One funny thing is I'm using QuickTime to do this. QuickTime apparently just plugs into your phone. And it needs to be, that looks good. I'll pull up Xcode where the project is, and you'll be able to see the output, and we'll follow along as the jailbreak is run. So, put up the right phone. All right, we're gonna run. takes a couple seconds because it has to do code signing on my machine to get the app onto the phone. And then from there, I'll go ahead and clear the history. I'll hit run. All right, and so what's happening right now is it's using Ian Beer's task for PID async wake, or his async wake to get us a task for PID. And here we go. We have the task for PID for the kernel. Okay. Then we go through and we attempt to obtain root. We see our current privileges are 501, which is mobile user. Okay. So we're in user mode. And then we go ahead and we, very nice. We go ahead and rewrite our cred structure and then our UID, EUID, and RUID, and then all of a sudden, bam, we're root. Okay, great. Then we set ourselves our platform attributes. We go ahead and remount the drive, and then here's the entitlement section. I threw a bunch of crap entitlements here for things I really don't need, like accessory wireless configuration, reader session format, because it needs to be big enough to hold the new entitlements. So I take those entitlements, that's their old hash, and then I replace them with the new awesome, amazing entitlement. And then I rewrite the hash, call it a day, we're now entitled. And then the rest of it is just writing files to the system and setting up the Amphi process to deal with Amphi's errors. So now at this point, this is in my history. Yeah. Everything worked. It did not. Oh, great. So my IP address changed on my phone. I didn't sacrifice enough chickens for the demo go. Connect. All right. Get that panned out. Sweet. All right. So I should be able to connect. All right, I'm in the system. I'm root. And there's all of, yeah, we're root on the box. So from there, I built in a web server to do, like, first of all, I wanted to pull files off the drive because I was worried about losing my phone. But then I built a kind of live kernel introspection setup. And so here's our kernel task with PID0. Here's where we're at. Down here, we're running a drop air web server. And we can look, and we can match up one-to-one with the source code going on here. Maybe, hopefully this isn't too small. And I apologize for this. But you can see like, oh, here's a link pointer backwards. Here's a link pointer forwards. Here's our PID. And here's all the relevant information, right? So it matches up one-to-one, well, almost one-to-one with their source code. So it's actually not too hard to follow. And I was really surprised by this because I thought previously, like, this is black magic. This used to be relegated to the gods of hackery. Like, no, anybody can do this because I can match up structs to anything. So, all right, let me pop back into presenter mode. So kind of lessons learned, looking back at what was done. Don't do this. I don't know, that's kind of rough, but the Chillin, which is a project by Jonathan Levin, and then Electra, which is a project by Coolstar, both provide great solutions with a lot more support than my jailbreak has. And they also have larger support communities around it, whereas I'm just one guy, and I did it for fun. And there's a lot to be said for having a community of people like helping you out and assisting and encouraging, because if you attack a hard problem by yourself, you get overwhelmed and then you have to do what I did and just break it down into small chunks. And there's always this disparity between the XNU kernel sources because they only give you the x86 sources. They don't give you the ARM sources. And so there is a little bit of like not one-to-oneness as you're looking at the code. You might see, oh, like this struct doesn't really line up, but I see this here in memory. There's that kind of problem. But having that community who's already solved those problems will really help. So please get involved. Like I'm a newcomer to the jailbreaking scene. This is like the first time I've done it. And there's been a lot of cool and really awesome people, especially on IRC. But One thing I have noticed is don't ask for when the next jailbreak is coming out because you'll just get auto banned from everything. Because people hate that. Because exploits cost a ton of money, and no one gives them away for free. So, all right, where do we go from here? iOS 12 is currently out. Alibaba produced a video saying that showing that they had a jailbroken device. Also, Luca Tedesca, I forget his Twitter handle, but Luca has produced a jailbreak as well. But these are all private; these are not public. So at this point, we're either hoping that someone releases their jailbreak or releases the exploits, and then we can plug them into Mine or Chillin or Electra. With that plug and play ability of Task or PID, you can just get a new exploit, plug it in, and let it go. There are some new hardware security mechanisms that are intrinsic to iOS 12, especially that are all only enabled on the newer phones. The newer phones have a different type of chip that does like pointer tagging and a couple other hardware very specific things. So, yeah, I need to get my hands on one of those devices and we can keep looking at that. So, go find some bugs. Does anybody have any questions? I think I'm like 3 or 4 minutes early. So, yeah, go for it. Oh, perfect. Whoa.
Nothing. Yeah, here it is.
Sweet.
So when you decided that you wanted to just overwrite those pointers in, I have to go back a couple slides. Why didn't you just tell the check to just ignore like everything in temp, like just change it to something else, some other directory, so then you could just copy data into temp and then run it from there?
So that is a viable solution, and I have to validate what I'm about to say, but I believe KTRR, the kernel, so there's KPP, which is kernel patch protection all over executable segments. KTRR looks at the read-only segments, and I believe those permissions, which are part of CFL, are inside of the read-only section. So if you change those, Watchtower is going to catch you. So I think that's why all the jumping around had to be done. But I will double check on that, yeah. Anybody, I'm up here. Let's do this. Yeah, probably. All right, and I think, unless anybody else has any other questions, we'll finish a little early. All right, thanks everybody for coming out. Oh yeah. Yeah, I'll put them on GitHub in about 30 seconds.